Welcome to the Injury to Recovery YouTube channel. My name is Greg, and this is Blaine from Recover Physical Therapy in Twin Falls. Thanks for being with us today, Blaine. We're talking about some more shoulder activity, from what I understand today, right?
Yeah, rotator cuff tears.
Rotator cuff tears, yes. I think we even mentioned that I had a family member that put his arm back around his back, and he even got to a point where he had to do a surgery on that rotator cuff. So
Yeah.
Well,
I'm glad you brought that up because rotator cuff tears, some of them do require surgery and some of them don't. So a smaller tear, usually the surgeon will usually refer the patient to therapy rather than do surgery. But if they're medium or larger size rotator cuff tears, then often they do need that surgical repair.
Okay, so we'll actually do two different videos on this. We'll talk one about the surgical side, and then one about the non-surgical, where they send you straight to physical therapy. What are you gonna have me do first?
Yeah, so today we'll talk about the non-surgical ones. So if the tear was small enough that it didn't warrant having surgery, or maybe there's other factors that make it a person not a surgical candidate, but they have a rotator cuff tear, so we'll talk about some things that can be done from a conservative standpoint to help rehabilitate your shoulder.
And so, I guess you have to let the doctor make that decision on whether or not it's surgical or non-surgical, correct?
Yeah, the doctor will generally take an MRI and discuss the results and give you your options and tell you the pros and cons of both, and they'll usually have a recommendation one way or the other.
Yeah, okay. Do you have people that get rotator cuff tears from just minor things like that? Like the arm over the car seat, or does it maybe on your golf swing or baseball swing?
They're both traumatic and non-traumatic rotator cuff tears. So your traumatic ones, it's often when people fall. So sometimes people fall, or sometimes they'll be hanging onto a railing and they'll fall and it yanks their arm up. Is a common way to do it. And then sometimes the non-traumatic tears happen when there may be a bone spur that develops in your shoulder, and that can start to rub on the tendon and eventually tear it. And so kind of the classic sign of those ones is it usually hurts at nighttime when you're trying to sleep.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, non-surgical, let's get after it.
Alrighty. So for non-surgical rotator cuff tears, so we want to start out with a good base in the scapula. The scapula is kind of the base of your shoulder. And so Greg has a lightweight resistance band here wrapped around the doorknob, and he's just doing some gentle rows like he's rowing a boat. And you'll notice as he rows backward, he's really squeezing his shoulder blades together. And so this can generally be done, and it's usually not too painful. You want to start out with a lighter band where there's not a lot of tension, but usually this can be done without causing much pain in a rotator cuff tear. And so this is a good way to keep the shoulder blades nice and strong. Yep.
Okay.
So here's another view of the row, and so you can see how Greg's squeezing his shoulder blades together there. The next exercise also focuses on the shoulder blades, on the scapula, and so Greg is just doing some shoulder circles. So he's going in the forward direction, doing forward circles, and that can be reversed where he can do backward circles as well. And he's holding a couple small 5-pound dumbbells in his hands. So, and if that's too painful, and it might be after a recent rotator cuff tear, you can do this just with the weight of your arms. But it's good to get that scapular motion by doing shoulder circles and reverse circles.
These are pretty small muscles, aren't they? For the rotator cuff.
The rotator cuff, yes, is very small muscles. The scapular muscles, however, are quite bulky.
Okay.
They're very strong.
Because even with just 5 pounds, this feels like it's actually starting to fatigue some of the smaller muscles in my shoulder. Should I expect that?
Yeah. And a lot of that's probably just because this is a motion that you probably don't think about doing very often.
No.
But this really makes a good foundation for working your ball and socket joints, your shoulder joint itself. You want to have your shoulder blades nice and strong first.
Nice.
Okay. This next exercise is called a serratus push-up, and so it's kind of a weird motion. But you'll notice Greg is leaning with his hands against the wall, and he is squeezing his shoulder blades together and kind of moving his body towards the wall, but he's not bending his elbows at all. And so the common mistake that people usually make when they attempt this exercise is they let their elbows bend, but you want to keep your elbows just stiff and straight as a board, and you're just squeezing your shoulder blades in and out. And so this is a real kind of an easy version of the exercise, assuming someone just tore their rotator cuff tear. You'd want to start really easy. As you get stronger, maybe a couple weeks down the road, you can put a steeper angle, and you can do this leaning against a wall or against a kitchen counter. Often works well. And then maybe 3 or 4 weeks further down the road, as you get stronger and the pain subsides, you can actually get all the way on the floor. And then a more advanced version is Greg's all the way on the floor, and again, notice he's keeping his elbows stiff and straight and just squeezing his shoulder blades together and back up. So there won't be quite as much movement of your body as if you're doing a regular push-up, because this is all coming out of your shoulder blades. So if you can do these exercises, these will establish a really good foundation of strength in your shoulder blade, and then we can advance to the next level and start focusing a little bit more on your shoulder joint, the ball and socket joint itself. Moving on from the shoulder blade exercises, this focuses right more on just your shoulder joints, your ball and socket joints of your shoulder. And we're using a set of pulleys here. So these pulleys can be purchased very inexpensively online, and we often use them in physical therapy to rehab shoulders. So they're a nice way to get that good functional reach where you're reaching your arm over your head. But you're basically using your good arm that you have not torn to help lift up your arm that is painful that you have torn the rotator cuff tear.
And when you do different angles, perhaps?
Yeah, you can kind of have your arm moving straight forward like this, or you can have it moving out to the side like so. And so oftentimes after a rotator cuff tear, people are not able to lift their arm overhead, but you put them on the pulleys and then they can. And this is kind of a bridge to get you to the point where you can eventually, as the pain subsides and you gradually rebuild strength, you can gradually regain the ability to lift your arm overhead, which is necessary for things like combing your hair and reaching
putting on a shirt.
Yes, dressing, reaching into your cupboards. So,
and the little things that you don't think about until you've injured one of these muscles, probably.
Yeah.
So,
and
yeah. You can get all sorts of different angles with that, can't you?
Yeah.
So you could do an angle like this. You could do straight out.
Yeah.
You could, yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, those are all great variations of different. The shoulder is a pretty amazing ball and socket joint. It can go in all different directions. And we can also use the pulleys to improve the behind the back motion, which is often lost with a rotator cuff tear. And so he's hanging onto the pulley behind his back on the arm he's injured, and then he's using his other arm to pull that. He pulls it down while it pulls the other arm up behind his back. So that's an important motion to have for getting dressed and cleaning yourself and reaching and grabbing your wallet or things like that.
Itching the middle of your back.
Yes, yes. The little things you take for granted until you lose them.
Yep.
And so if you do not have a pulley system, a good substitute for that is you can just walk your hand up a wall. And so you can just slowly try to reach it up there as far as you can go. And you can do this motion while you're facing the wall, or you can also kind of turn your body sideways and go up sideways into more of a shoulder abduction movement. And so this is a good substitute too if you don't have shoulder pulleys. Great way to stretch your arm back out and regain the motion that likely will be lost with a rotator cuff tear.
And this you can really stretch out like the muscle and where it's going.
You can. So
depending on how you do this abduction side.
Yeah, once you get your arm up there, you can kind of pause and hold it up there, and just, as long as it's not too painful, you can just kind of pause and get a good stretch in there. It's not a bad thing to do.
If you have the rotator cuff, will you feel a lot of tightness in this area? So.
Yeah, and a lot of people too, they probably won't go as high as what you're demonstrating because it will be too painful. Mm-hmm. But you want to just do what you can. So your hands might only be level with your head. It might be as high as you can go for now. But just mark it on the wall, and then you can just try to go a little bit higher every day. Even if it's only a centimeter further, then eventually you'll get up there if you stay consistent with it.
Yeah, the daily activity that you gotta rinse your own cottage cheese, if you've ever heard that expression.
Yes, it has been a while, but I have. So these next exercises are isometrics. Isometrics are when you're pushing but nothing is actually moving. And so these are really good to pair up with the stretching exercises we showed you with the pulleys. And so Greg, for this first one, is internal rotation. So he's putting his hand on the wall, his elbow is kind of tucked into his ribs, and he's pushing his hand into the wall.
It'll give you a better view right here.
Yeah, so I'll show you with his other arm there. And so if the wall was not there, he'd be doing this motion where your hand would be rotating across to your stomach. So he's just pushing into the wall, and you want to push and hold for a good slow 10 seconds, and just count that out. And then the next one is the exact opposite, where you put the back of your hand on the other side of the wall. So we can show you on either arm there. But he's pushing outward. This is called external rotation. And so he's just pushing the back of his hand into the wall. And again, this is isometric, so he's just going to push and hold it for about 10 seconds. And so you want to count that out nice and slow. And this works the rotator cuff pretty directly. This is a good, effective exercise. Isometrics are good to build up muscle, and they're also very low risk, so it's very unlikely that you're going to further tear your rotator cuff tear while you're doing isometrics. And then the last isometric we'll have you do is called shoulder abduction. So abduction is like the motion you make when you're making a snow angel or doing a jumping jack. And so he'll put the back of his hand on the wall with his side facing the wall, and he's just going to push straight out. And again, we'll hold that for a nice slow 10 seconds. And this one, you don't have to push too hard to feel a pretty good burn in there.
No, and I'm remembering as a child we would push out like this because it restricts the blood flow, and then afterwards you step away and your arms feel like they want to go up.
Yes, the games you played when you were a kid.
Hey, you know what? It probably was building the muscle that you needed, right? So
Yeah. Isometrics are probably the most underrated exercises because they're boring.
No one wants to just stand there and just hold
Yes.
hold the wall.
But for rehab purposes, very effective though. This next exercise, so this is what we advance to after the isometrics start to get easy, and once they're not painful, is you can advance to some resistance exercises with bands. And so this is actually the same motion he was doing in the door with the isometric, but this one is not isometric because he's moving. And so we've put a pillowcase between his ribs and his elbow, and he's just rotating that hand across your stomach, and you can actually let it rotate back out this way a little bit further, Greg. So this is called internal rotation. And so you can make it harder by stepping further away, or you can make it easier by stepping closer to the wall if you need to. But this strengthens the internal portion of your rotator cuff.
And just so that people don't have to look at the back of the head too much in this video, we'll do the other way, right here.
So this is the opposite motion where you're externally rotating. So this works the external portion of your rotator cuff. And again, he's just keeping his elbow tucked into his ribs there, using the towel as a cue, and rotating outward. And this one is usually a little bit harder than the first one, the internal rotation. So you can probably feel a good little burn behind your shoulder there.
Actually, yeah, I feel it pretty quick right about there, right underneath the scapula,
Yeah.
on the inside of the scapula.
And this is an exercise I probably wouldn't do soon after a rotator cuff tear. I'd probably, unless it was very mild, I'd probably start with some more gentle, like the pulleys and the wall stretches first before we advance to this one.
Yeah.
And you make sure the isometrics we did against the wall are easy before you start doing this one.
I can understand why, because that's fatigue already right there.
Yeah. These last exercises we showed you for rotator cuff tears are more advanced, so again, I wouldn't start these until I've done the previous exercises first and until they feel easy. But Greg is doing some forward flexion here, and he's holding a 5-pound dumbbell. You probably don't want to start with one that heavy. You might just start with the weight of your arm, or you can start with like a can of beans, weighs about a pound or so. But you can gradually build your way up, and after you've been doing that for a couple weeks, you can put a 3 or 5 pound dumbbell in your arm. And you can actually, you want to stay to where it's not too painful, but you can actually bring it all the way up, because eventually we want to get you to where you get full range of motion in your shoulder and a good functional upward reach.
You want to take it easy, even if you have normal rotation, because I even feel a pop on this sometimes, depending on how I'm doing it.
Some popping.
So you might want to just take it slow, make sure that you have good control over this. I would imagine. I'm guessing. That's just my thought.
Slow is always good and safe, because if you're moving slow, it's very unlikely you'll re-injure yourself. I'm glad you brought up the popping though, because shoulder popping in your shoulders is actually nothing to be too worried about. It's very normal. And so even people who don't have injuries get a lot of popping in their shoulders. As long as it's not a painful pop, it's nothing to be too concerned about.
What about going back?
Yeah, that's a good one too. So that will improve the motion that you need to be able to reach behind your back or reach back to put your seatbelt on or those types of motions.
Oh yeah. All right.
So good example there. And the last one, he's going to go down to a smaller dumbbell because this one is more difficult, is shoulder abduction. So we did this one isometrically against the wall, and now we're doing it just regular with weights, with movement. And you can kind of vary the angle. Right now, Greg has his palm facing downward. You can also have your palm facing forward. And that sometimes if you have some impingement in your shoulder, if you rotate your thumb up like that, it can give you a little bit more space in the shoulder joint and be a little bit more comfortable. Whereas if you rotate your thumb down, people often feel more pain and have less motion with that.
Yeah.
So I would recommend.
Yeah, your body doesn't work that way.
No, it's so good to lead with your thumb and have your palm facing forward on this one. And again, I would start this one without any weight, just the weight of your arm, or you can even start this one with the pulleys like we demonstrated previously, and just gradually build the weight back up.
All right. Well, you just found a bunch of tiny little muscles in my shoulder there, Blaine, to work out. And I imagine that's what we're looking at when we're looking at a rotator cuff, right?
Yeah, rotator cuff muscles are small.
Yeah.
Even on bodybuilders, they're not that big.
So even Arnold Schwarzenegger will not have large rotator cuffs. So,
Correct.
Sorry, Arnold.
But,
Any final words before we get finished on this video?
I mean, rotator cuff tears are, unfortunately, they're quite painful.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have one, I'm sorry. It's just not a fun injury. But if it's a small rotator cuff tear, my experience and a lot of the medical research shows that people generally do rehabilitate well with conservative care, with therapy, and the good news is they often don't require surgery if it's small.
Anyway, thanks a bunch for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time.